Okay. So we're starting off tonight at chapter 12, which is Flight to the Ford. When Frodo came to himself, he was still clutching the ring desperately. He was lying by the fire, which was now piled high and burning brightly. His 3 companions were bending over him. "What has happened? Where's the Pale King?" he asked wildly. They were too overjoyed to hear him speak to answer for a while, nor did they understand his question. At length he gathered from Sam that they had seen nothing but the vague shadowy shapes coming towards them. Suddenly, to his horror, Sam found that his master had vanished, and at that moment a black shadow rushed past him, and he fell. He heard Frodo's voice, but it seemed to come from a great distance, or from under the earth, crying out strange words. They saw nothing more until they stumbled over the body of Frodo, lying as if dead, face downwards on the grass, with his sword beneath him. Strider ordered them to pick him up and lay him near the fire, and then he disappeared. That was now a good while ago. Sam plainly was beginning to have doubts again about Strider, but while they were talking he returned, appearing suddenly out of the shadows. They started, and Sam drew his sword and stood over Frodo, but Strider knelt down swiftly by his side. "I'm not a Black Rider, Sam," he said gently, "nor in league with them. I've been trying to discover something of their movements, but I have found nothing. I cannot think why they have gone and do not attack again, but there is no feeling of their presence anywhere at hand." When he heard what Frodo had to tell, he became full of concern, and shook his head and sighed. Then he ordered Pippin and Merry to heat as much water as they could in their small kettles, and to bathe the wound with it. "Keep the fire going well, and keep Frodo warm," he said. Then he got up and walked away, and called Sam to him. "I think I understand things better now," he said in a low voice. "There seem only to have been 5 of the enemy. Why they were not all here, I don't know, but I don't think they expected to be resisted. They've drawn off for the time being, but not far, I fear. They will come again another night if we cannot escape. They are only waiting because they think that their purpose is almost accomplished, and that the ring cannot fly much further. I fear, Sam, that they believe your master has a deadly wound that will subdue him to their will. We shall see." Sam choked with tears. "Don't despair," said Strider. "You must trust me now. Your Frodo is made of sterner stuff than I had guessed, though Gandalf hinted that it might prove so. He's not slain, and I think he will resist the evil power of the wound longer than his enemies will expect. I will do all I can to help him and heal him. Guard him well while I am away." He hurried off and disappeared again into the darkness. Frodo dozed, though the pain of his wound was slowly growing, and a deadly chill was spreading from his shoulder to his arm and side. His friends watched over him, warming him and bathing his wound. The night passed slowly and wearily. Dawn was growing in the sky, and the dell was filling with gray light when Strider at last returned. "Look," he cried, and stooping he lifted from the ground a black cloak that had lain there hidden by the darkness. A foot above the lower hem there was a slash. "This was the stroke of Frodo's sword," he said. "The only hurt that it did to his enemy, I fear, for it is unharmed, but all blades perish that pierce that dreadful king. More deadly to him was the name of Elbereth, and more deadly to Frodo was this." He stooped again and lifted up a long, thin knife. There was a cold gleam in it. As Strider raised it, they saw that near the end its edge was notched, and the point was broken off. But even as he held it up in the glowing light, they gazed in astonishment, for the blade seemed to melt and vanished like a smoke in the air, leaving only the hilt in Strider's hand. "Alas," he cried, "it was this cursed knife that gave the wound. Few know have the skill in healing to match such evil weapons, but I will do what I can." He sat down on the ground, and taking the dagger hilt, laid it on his knees, and he sang over it a slow song in a strange tongue. Then, setting it aside, he turned to Frodo, and in a soft tone spoke words the others could not catch. From the pouch at his belt he drew out the long leaves of a plant. "These leaves," he said, "I have walked far to find, for this plant does not grow in the bare hills, but in the thickets away south of the road. I found it in the dark, by the scent of its leaves." Yeah, that was how that sentence went. He crushed a leaf in his fingers, and it gave out a sweet and pungent fragrance. "It is fortunate that I could find it, for it is a healing plant that the men of the West brought to Middle-earth. Ethelus, they named it, and it grows now sparsely, and only near places where they dwelt or camped of old. And it is not known in the north, except to some of those who wander in the wild. It has great virtues, but over such a wound as this, its healing powers may be small." He threw the leaves into boiling water and bathed Frodo's shoulder. The fragrance of the steam was refreshing, and those that were unhurt felt their minds calmed and cleared. The herb also had some power over the wound, for Frodo felt the pain and also the sense of frozen cold lessen in his side, but the life did not return to his arm, and he could not raise or use his hand. He bitterly regretted his foolishness and reproached himself for weakness of will, for he now perceived that in putting on the ring he obeyed not his own desire, but the commanding wish of his enemies. He wondered if he would remain maimed for life, and how they would now manage to continue their journey. He felt too weak to stand. The others were discussing this very question. They quickly decided to leave Weathertop as soon as possible. "I think now," said Strider, "that the enemy has been watching this place for some days. If Gandalf ever came here, that he must have been forced to ride away, and he will not return. In any case, we are in great peril here after dark, since the attack of last night, and we can hardly meet greater danger wherever we go." As soon as the daylight was full, they had some hurried food and packed. It was impossible for Frodo to walk, so they divided the greater part of their baggage among the 4 of them, and put Frodo on the pony. In the last few days the poor beast had improved wonderfully. It had already seemed fatter and stronger, and had begun to show an affection for its new masters, especially for Sam. Bill Ferny's treatment must have been very hard for the journey in the wild to seem so much better than its former life. They started off in a southerly direction. This would mean crossing the road, but it was the quickest way to more wooded country, and they needed fuel, for Strider said that Frodo must be kept warm, especially at night, while fire would be of some protection for them all. It was also his plan to shorten their journey by cutting across another great loop of the road. East, beyond Weathertop, it changed its course and took a wide bend northwards. They made their way slowly and cautiously round the southwestern slopes of the hill, and came in a little while to the edge of the road. There was no sign of the riders, but even as they were hurrying across, they heard far away 2 cries, a cold voice calling, and a cold voice answering. Trembling, they sprang forward and made for the thickets that lay ahead. The land before them sloped away southwards, but it was wild and pathless. Bushes and stunted trees grew in dense patches, with wide, barren spaces in between. The grass was scanty, coarse, and gray, and the leaves in the thickets were faded and falling. It was a cheerless land, and their journey was slow and gloomy. They spoke little as they trudged along. Frodo's heart was grieved as he watched them walking beside him with their heads down, and their backs bowed under their heavy burdens. Even Strider seemed tired and heavy-hearted. Before the first day's march was over, Frodo's pain began to grow again, but he did not speak of it for a long time. 4 days passed, without the ground or the scene changing much, except that behind them weathertops slowly sank, and before them the distant mountains loomed a little nearer. Yet since that far cry they had seen and heard no sign of the enemy that marked their flight, or followed them. They dreaded the dark hours, and kept watch in pairs by night, expecting at any time to see black shapes stalking in the gray night, dimly lit by the cloud-veiled moon. But they saw nothing, and heard no sound but the sigh of withered leaves and grass. Not once did they feel the sense of present evil that assailed them before the attack in the dell. It seemed too much to hope that the riders had already lost their trail again. Perhaps they were waiting to make some ambush in a narrow place. At the end of the 5th day, the ground began once more to rise slowly out of the wide, shallow valley into which they had descended. Strider now turned their course again northeastwards, and on the 6th day they reached the top of a long, slow-climbing slope, and saw far ahead a huddle of wooded hills. Away below them they could see the road sweeping round the feet of the hills, and to their right a grey river gleamed pale in the thin sunshine. In the distance they glimpsed yet another river, in a stony valley, half-veiled in mist. "I'm afraid we must go to the road here for a while," said Strider. "We have come now to the river Horwell." Sorry, there's a hyphen between that word, so it's a little hard to... "We have come now to the river Horwell, that the elves call Mithaethel. It flows down out of the Etten Moors, the Troll Fells north of Rivendell, and joins the Loudwater away in the south. Some call it the Grey Flood after that. It is a great water before it finds the sea. There's no way over it below its sources in the Etten Moors, except by the last bridge on which the road crosses." "What is that other river we can see far away there?" asked Merry. "That is Loudwater, the Bruinen of Rivendell," answered Strider. "The road runs along the edge of the hills for many miles from the bridge to the ford of Bruinen, but I have not yet thought how we shall cross the water. One river at a time. We shall be fortunate indeed if we do not find the last bridge held against us." The next day, early in the morning, they came down again to the borders of the road. Sam and Strider went forward, but they found no sign of any travelers or riders. Here, under the shadow of the hills, there had been some rain. Strider judged that it had fallen 2 days before, and had washed away all footprints. No horsemen had passed since then, as far as he could see. They hurried along with all the speed they could make, and after a mile or two they saw the last bridge ahead, at the bottom of a short, steep slope. They dreaded to see black figures waiting there, but they saw none. Strider made them take cover in a thicket at the side of the road while he went forward to explore. Before long he came hurrying back. "I can see no sign of the enemy," he said, "and I wonder very much what that means, but I have found something very strange." He held out his hand and showed a single pale green jewel. I found it in the mud in the middle of the bridge," he said. "It is a beryl, an elfstone. Whether it was set there or let fall by chance I cannot say, but it brings hope to me. I will take it as a sign that we may pass the bridge, but beyond that I dare not keep to the road without some clearer token." That is quite interesting. Oh, we're going to get more singing coming up soon. Oh, we're gonna get a couple of pages of singing in the following chapter. What do you mean, chapter 2? Oh, we're gonna get book 2. I forgot that these books were divided like that. So we are about halfway. And I have I just lost the page that we were on. Whoops, my bad. Flight to the Ford. Yes, we're still in Flight to the Ford. So, I missed last week, but I finally got a little break this week from exams and such, so I'm... Okay. Okay, I think I found our place again. At once they went on again. They crossed the bridge in safety, hearing no sound but the water swirling against its 3 great arches. A mile further on they came to a narrow ravine that led away northwards through the steep lands on the left of the road. Here Strider turned aside, and soon they were lost in a somber country of dark trees winding among the feet of sullen hills. The hobbits were glad to leave the cheerless lands and the perilous road behind them, but this new country seemed threatening and unfriendly. As they went forward, the hills about them steadily rose. Here and there, upon heights and ridges, they caught glimpses of ancient walls of stone and the ruins of towers. They had an ominous look. Frodo, who was not walking, had time to gaze ahead and to think. He recalled Bilbo's account of his journey and the threatening towers on the hills north of the road in the country near the Troll's Wood, where his first serious adventure had happened. Frodo guessed that they were now in the same region and wondered if by chance they would pass near the spot. "Who lives in this land?" he asked. "And who built these towers? Is this troll country?" "No," said Strider. "Trolls do not build. No one lives in this land. Men once dwelt here, ages ago, but none remain now. They became an evil people, as legends tell, for they fell under the shadow of Angmar. But all were destroyed in the war that brought the North Kingdoms to its end. But that is now so long ago that the hills have forgotten them, though a shadow still lies on the land." "Where did you learn such tales, if all the land is empty and forgetful?" asked Peregrine. "The birds and beasts do not tell of that sort." "The heirs of Elendil do not forget all things past," said Strider, "and many more things than I can tell are remembered in Rivendell." "Have you often been to Rivendell?" asked Frodo. "I have," said Strider. "I dwelt there once, and still return when I may. There my heart is, but it is not my fate to sit in peace, even in the fair house of Elrond." I'm super excited to get back to Rivendell, not gonna lie. I kind of always find Elrond to be like one of my favorite non-main characters. Not really sure why. I don't know. Maybe when we get there and we meet him again, I'll have more to say on that. The hills now began to shut them in. The road behind held its way to the river Bruinen, but they were now hidden from view. The travelers came into a long valley, narrow, deeply cloven, dark, and silent. Trees with old and twisted roots hung over cliffs and piled up behind into mounting slopes of pine wood. The hobbits grew very weary. They advanced slowly, for they had to pick their way through a pathless country, encumbered by fallen trees and tumbled rocks. As long as they could, they avoided climbing for Frodo's sake, because it was in fact difficult to find any way up out of the narrow dales. They had been 2 days in this country while the weather turned wet. The wind began to blow steadily out of the west and pour the water of the distant seas on the dark heads of the hills in fine drenching rain. By nightfall they were all soaked, and their camp was cheerless, for they could not get any fire to burn. The next day the hills rose still higher and steeper before them, and they were forced to turn away northwards, out of their course. Strider seemed to be getting anxious. They were nearly 10 days out from Weathertop, and their stock of provisions was beginning to run low. It went on raining. That night, they camped on a stony shelf with a rock wall behind them, in which there was a shallow cave, a mere scoop in the cliff. Frodo was restless. The cold and wet had made his wound more painful than ever, and the ache and sense of deadly chill took away all sleep. He lay tossing and turning, and listening fearfully to the stealthy night noises, wind and chinks of rock, water dripping, a crack, the sudden rattling fall of a loosened stone. He felt that black shapes were advancing to smother him, but when he sat up, he saw nothing but the back of Strider, sitting hunched up, smoking his pipe and watching. He lay down again, and passed into an uneasy dream, in which he walked on the grass in his garden in the Shire, but it seemed faint and dim, less clear than the tall black shadows that stood looking over the hedge. Welcome, Dag. In the morning, he woke to find that the rain had stopped. The clouds were still thick, but they were breaking, and pale strips of blue appeared between them. The wind was shifting again. They did not start early. Immediately after their cold and comfortless breakfast, Strider went off alone, telling the others to remain under the shelter of the cliff until he came back. He was going to climb up, if he could, and get a look at the lie of the land. When he returned, he was not reassuring. "We've come too far to the north," he said, "and we must find some way to turn back southwards again. If we keep on as we are, we shall get up into the Etondales, far north of Rivendell. That is troll country, and little known to me. We could perhaps find our way through and come round to Rivendell from the north, but it would take too long, for I do not know the way, and our food would not last. So somehow or other we must find the ford of Bruinen." The rest of that day they spent scrambling over rocky ground. They found a passage between two hills that led them into a valley running southeast, the direction that they wished to take, but towards the end of the day they found their road again barred by a ridge of high land. Its dark edge against the sky was broken into many bare points like teeth of a blunted saw. They had a choice between going back or climbing over it. Excuse me. They decided to attempt the climb, but it proved very difficult. Before long, Frodo was obliged to dismount and struggle along on foot. Even so, they often despaired of getting their pony up, or indeed, of finding a path for themselves, burdened as they were. The light was nearly gone, and they were all exhausted, when at last they reached the top. They had climbed onto a narrow saddle between two higher points, and the land fell steeply away again, only a short distance ahead. Frodo threw himself down and lay on the ground shivering. His left arm was lifeless, and his side and shoulder felt as if icy claws were laid upon them. The trees and rocks about him seemed shadowy and dim. "We cannot go any further," said Merry to Strider. "I'm afraid that this has been too much for Frodo. I'm dreadfully anxious about him. What are we to do? Do you think they will be able to cure him in Rivendell, if we ever get there?" "We shall see," answered Strider. "There's nothing more that I can do in the wilderness, and it is chiefly because of his wound that I am so anxious to press on, but I agree that we can go no further tonight." "What is the matter with my master?" asked Sam in a low voice, looking appealingly at Strider. "His wound was small, and it is already closed. There's nothing to be seen but a cold white mark on his shoulder." "Frodo has been touched by the weapons of the enemy," said Strider, "and there is some poison or evil at work that is beyond my skill to drive out. But do not give up hope, Sam." Night was cold upon the high ridge. They lit a small fire down under the gnarled roots of an old pine that hung over a shallow pit. It looked as if stone had once been quarried there, They sat huddled together. The wind blew chill through the pass, and they heard the treetops lower down, moaning and sighing. Frodo lay half in a dream, imagining that endless dark wings were sweeping by above him, and that on the wings rode pursuers that sought him in all the hollows of the hills. Strider did say something about the birds and the owls, if I remember right. The morning dawned bright and fair. The air was clean, and the light pale and clear in a rain-washed sky. Their hearts were encouraged, but they longed for the sun to warm their cold, stiff limbs. Oh, me too. I'm so ready for... As soon as it was light, Strider took Merry with him, and went to survey the country from the height to the east of the pass. The sun had risen and was shining brightly when he returned with more comforting news. They were now going more or less in the right direction. If they went on, down the further side of the ridge, they would have the mountains on their left. Some way ahead, Strider had caught a glimpse of the Loudwater again, and he knew that, though it was hidden from view, the road to the ford was not far from the river and lay on the side nearest to them. "We must make for the road again," he said. "We cannot hope to find a path through these hills. Whatever danger may beset it, the road is our only way to the ford." One other thing that... I'll stop interrupting pretty soon, but another thing I kind of noticed as I was reading is, while the descriptions are a little bit, maybe perhaps excessively detailed, I guess maybe, they're not purple. Like, there's very little, oh, the sky was as blah as a blah blah blah, or like, there was that one comment about like the cliff looking like a dull saw blade, and that was kind of when I thought of it. Like, the descriptions are very vivid, but in a very real and grounded manner, which I really appreciate. I think some people may find it boring, but I actually really appreciate it. It helps to create a very solid scene in my mind. Okay, enough of that. As soon as they had eaten, they set out again. They climbed slowly down the southern side of the ridge, but the way was much easier than they had expected, for the slope was far less steep on this side, and before long Frodo was able to ride again. Bill Ferny's poor old pony was developing an unexpected talent for picking out a path, and for sparing its rider as many jolts as possible. The spirits of the party rose again. Even Frodo felt better in the morning light, but every now and again a mist seemed to obscure his sight, and he passed his hands over his eyes. Pippin was a little ahead of the others. Suddenly he turned round and called to them. "There's a path here," he cried. When they came up with him, they saw that he had made no mistake. There were clearly the beginnings of a path that climbed with many windings out of the woods below and faded away on the hilltop behind. In places it was now faint and overgrown, or choked with fallen stones and trees. But at one time it seemed to have been much used. It was a path made by strong arms and heavy feet. Here and there old trees had been cut or broken down, and large rocks cloven or heaved aside to make a way. They followed the track for some while, for it offered much the easiest way down. But they went cautiously, and their anxiety increased as they came into the dark woods, and the path grew plainer and broader. Suddenly coming out of the belt of fir trees, it ran steeply down a slope, and turned sharply to the left round the corner of a rocky shoulder of the hill. When they came over the corner, they looked round, and saw that the path ran on over a level strip under the face of a low cliff overhung with trees. In the stony wall there was a door hanging crookedly ajar upon one great hinge. Outside the door they all halted. There was a cave or rock chamber behind, but in the gloom inside nothing could be seen. Strider, Sam, and Mary pushed with all their strength and managed to open the door a little wider, and then Strider and Mary went in. They did not go far, for on the floor lay many old bones, and nothing else was to be seen near the entrance except some great empty jars and broken pots. "Surely this is a troll hole, if ever there was one," said Pippin. "Come out, you two, and let us get away. Now we know who made the path, and we had better get off it quick." "There's no need, I think," said Strider, coming out. "It is certainly a troll hole, but it seems to have been long forsaken. I don't think we need be afraid, but let us go down warily, and we shall see." The path went on again from the door, and turning to the right again, across the level space, plunged down a thick wooded slope. Pippin, not liking to show Strider that he was still afraid, went on ahead with Mary. Sam and Strider came back, one on each side of Frodo's pony, for the path was now broad enough for 4 or 5 hobbits to walk abreast. But they had not gone very far before Pippin came running back, followed by Mary. They both looked terrified. "There are trolls," Pippin panted. "Down in the clearing, in the woods, not far below. We got a sight of them through the tree trunks. They are very large." "We'll come and look at them," said Strider, picking up a stick. Frodo said nothing, but Sam looked scared. The sun was now high, and it shone down through the half-stripped branches of the trees, and lit the clearing with bright patches of light. They halted suddenly on the edge, and peered through the tree trunks, holding their breath. There stood the trolls, 3 large trolls. One was stooping, and the other 2 stood staring at him. Strider walked forward unconcernedly. "Get up, old stone," he said, and broke his stick upon the stooping troll. Nothing happened. There was a gasp of astonishment from the hobbits, and then even Frodo laughed. "Well," he said, "we are forgetting our family history. These must be the very 3 that were caught by Gandalf, quarreling over the right way to cook 13 dwarves and 1 hobbit." "I had no idea we were anywhere near the place," said Pippin. He knew the story well. Bilbo and Frodo had told it often, but as a matter of fact, he had never more than half believed it. Even now he looked at the stone trolls with suspicion, wondering if some magic might not suddenly bring them to life again. "You are forgetting not only your family history, but all you ever knew about trolls," said Strider. "It is broad daylight with a bright sun, and yet you come back trying to scare me with a tale of live trolls waiting for us in this glade. In any case, you might have noticed that one of them has an old bird's nest behind his ear. That would be a most unusual ornament for a live troll." They all laughed. Frodo felt his spirits reviving. The reminder of Bilbo's first successful adventure was heartening. The sun, too, was warm and comforting, and the mist before his eyes seemed to be lifting a little. They rested for some time in the glade, and took their midday meal right under the shadow of the troll's large legs. "Won't somebody give us a bit of a song while the sun is high?" said Mary, when they had finished. "We haven't had a song or a tale for days." "Not since Weathertop," said Frodo. The others looked at him. "Don't worry about me," he added. "I feel much better, but I don't think I could sing. Perhaps Sam could dig something out of his memory." "Come on, Sam," said Mary. "There's more stored in your head than you let on about." "I don't know about that," said Sam. "But how would this suit? It ain't what I call proper poetry, if you understand me. It's just a bit of nonsense." "Oh, great. More nonsense from the professor. Wonderful. But these old images here brought it to my mind." Standing up with his hands behind his back as if he was at school, he began to sing to an old tune. What tune is this one gonna be that I'll discover midway through, huh? Troll sat alone on his seat of stone, and munched and mumbled a bare old bone. For many a year he had gnawed it near, for meat was hard to come by, done by gum by. In a cave in the hills he dwelt alone, and meat was hard to come by. I'm gonna be trying to wonder what song this is about. Up came Tom with his big boots on. Said he to Troll, "Pray, what is yon? For it looks like the shin of my nuncle Tim, as should be a lion in graveyard, caveyard, paveyard. This many a year has Tim been gone, and I thought he were lion in graveyard." "My lad," said Troll, "this bone I stole, but what be bones that lie in a hole? Thy nuncle was dead as a lump of lead, afore I found his shin bone, tin bone, thin bone. He can spare a share for a poor old troll, for he don't need his shin bone." I feel like it's almost... I don't know. Said Tom, "I don't see why the likes of thee, without axe and leave, should go makin' free with the shank or the shin o' my father's kin. So hand the old bone over, rover, trover. Though dead he be, it belongs to he, so hand the old bone over." "For a couple of pins," says Troll, and grins. "I'll eat thee too, and gnaw thy shins. A bit of fresh meat will go down sweet. I'll try my teeth on thee now, he now, see now. I'm tired of gnawing old bones and shins, I've a mind to dine on thee now." But just as he thought his dinner was caught, he found his hands had hold of naught, for he could mind. Tom slipped behind, and gave him the boot to larn him, warn him, darn him. A bump of the boot on the seat, Tom thought, would be the way to larn him. L-A-R-N, I don't know what that word is. But harder than stone is the flesh and bone of a troll that sits in the hills alone. As well set your boot to the mountain's root, for the seat of a troll don't feel it, peel it, heel it. Old Troll laughed when he heard Tom groan, as he knew his toes could feel it. That is actually quite funny. Tom's leg is game, since home he came, and his bootless foot is lasting lame, but Troll don't care, and he's still there. With the bone he boned from its owner, donor, boner. Thanks. Troll's old seat is still the same, and the bone he boned from its owner. Huh? What? Okay. Well, that's a warning to us all, laughed Mary. It is as well you used a stick and not your hand, Strider. Where did you come by that, Sam? Asked Pippin. I've never heard those words before. Sam muttered something inaudible. It's out of his own head, of course, said Frodo. I'm learning a lot about Sam Gamgee on this journey. First he was a conspirator, now he's a jester. He'll end up by becoming a wizard or a warrior. I hope not, said Sam. I don't want to be neither. That was adorable. In the afternoon, they went on down the woods. They were probably following the very track that Gandalf, Bilbo, and the dwarves had used many years before. After a few miles, they came out on the top of a high bank above the road. Sorry, that poetry had some odd phrasing, and it had somewhat jumbled my brain a little bit. At this point, the road had left the Harwell far behind the river down in its narrow valley, and now clung close to the feet of the hills, rolling and winding lastward among the woods and heather-covered slopes toward the ford and the mountains. Not far down the bank, Strider pointed at a stone in the grass. On it, roughly cut and now much weathered, could still be seen dwarf runes and secret marks. There, said Mary. That must be the stone that marked the place where the troll's gold was hidden. How much is left of Bilbo's share, I wonder, Frodo? Frodo looked at the stone and wished that Bilbo had brought home no treasure more perilous, nor less easy to part with. None at all, he said. Bilbo gave it all away. He told me he did not feel it was really his, as it came from robbers. The road lay quiet under the long shadows of early evening. There was no sign of any other travelers to be seen, as there was now no other possible course for them to take. They climbed down the bank, and turning left went off as fast as they could. Soon a shoulder of the hills cut off the light of the fast westerning sun. A cold wind flowed down to meet them from the mountains ahead. They were beginning to look out for a place off the road where they could camp for the night when they heard a sound that brought sudden fear back into their hearts, the noise of hoofs behind them. They looked back, but they could not see far because of the many windings and rollings of the road. As quickly as they could, they scampered off the beaten way and up into the deep heather and bilberry bushwood on the slopes above, until they came to a small patch of thick-growing hazels. As they peered out from among the bushes, they could see the road, faint and gray in the failing light, some 30 feet below them. The sound of hoofs grew nearer. They were going fast, with a light clippity-clippity-clip. Then faintly, as if it was blown away from them by the breeze, they seemed to catch a dim ringing, as of small bells tinkling. "That does not sound like a Black Rider's horse," said Frodo, listening intently. The other hobbits agreed hopefully that it did not, but they all remained full of suspicion. They had been in fear of pursuit for so long that any sound from behind them seemed ominous and unfriendly. But Strider was now leaning forward, stooped to the ground, with a hand to his ear and a look of joy on his face. The light faded, and the leaves on the bushes rustled softly. Clearer and nearer now the bells jingled, and clippity-clip came the quick trotting feet. Suddenly into view below came a white horse, gleaming in the shadows, running swiftly. In the dusk its headstall flickered and flashed, as if it were studded with gems like living stars. The rider's cloak streamed behind him, and his hood was thrown back. His golden hair flowed, shimmering in the wind of his speed. To Frodo it appeared that a white light was shining through the form and raiment of the rider, as if through a thin veil. Strider sprang from hiding and dashed down towards the road, leaping with a cry through the heather. But even before he had moved or called, the rider had reined his horse and halted, looking up towards the thicket where they stood. When he saw Strider, he dismounted and ran to meet him, calling out, "Oh, I got to have a whole sentence here of Elvish. Sorry, guys. Aina vedwi Dunedain, Megovanin." His speech and clear ringing voice left no doubt in their hearts. The rider was of the elven folk. No others that dwelt in the wide world had voices so fair to hear, but there seemed to be a note of haste or fear in his call, and they saw that he was now speaking quickly and urgently to Strider. Soon Strider beckoned them, and the hobbits left the bushes and hurried down the road. "This is Glorfindel, who dwells in the house of Elrond," said Strider. "Hail and well met at last," said the elf lord to Frodo. "I was sent from Rivendell to look for you. We feared that you were in danger upon the road." "Then Gandalf has reached Rivendell?" cried Frodo joyfully. "No, he had not when I departed, but that was 9 days ago," answered Glorfindel. "Elrond received news that troubled him. Some of my kindred journeying in your land beyond the Baranduin learned that things were amiss, and sent messages as swiftly as they could find. There is a little asterisk here next to Baranduin that says, the Brandywine River." They said that the 9 were abroad, and that you were astray, bearing a great burden without guidance, for Gandalf had not returned. There were few even in Rivendell that can ride openly against the Nine, but such as there were, Elrond sent out north, west, and south. It was thought that you might turn far aside to avoid pursuit and become lost in the wilderness. I wonder how they are communicating. Like, they've mentioned that before, that who was that? Gildor. I just flipped back and opened up onto the correct page with Gildor's name right up in the top corner. How amazing. Anyway, yeah, probably magic. Who knows? It was my lot to take the road, and I came to the bridge of Mithaithel. There's that word. And left a token there, nigh on 7 days ago. 3 of the servants of Sauron were upon the bridge, but they withdrew, and I pursued them westward. I came also upon 2 others, but they turned away southward. Since then I have searched for your trail. 2 days ago I found it, and followed it over the bridge, and today I marked where you descended from the hills again. But come, there is no time for further news. Since you are here, we must risk the peril of the road and go. There are 5 behind us, and when they find your trail upon the road, they will ride after us like the wind. And they are not all. Where the other 4 may be, I do not know. I fear that we may find the ford is already held against us. While Glorfindel was speaking, the shades of evening deepened. Frodo felt a great weariness come over him. Ever since the sun began to sink, the mist before his eyes had darkened, and he felt that a shadow was coming between him and the faces of his friends. Now pain assailed him, and he felt cold. He swayed, clutching at Sam's arm. "My master is sick and wounded," said Sam angrily. "He can't go riding after nightfall. He needs rest." Glorfindel caught Frodo as he sank to the ground, and taking him gently in his arms, he looked in his face with grave anxiety. Briefly, Strider told of the attack on their camp under Weathertop, and of the deadly knife. He drew out the hilt which he kept, and handed it to the elf. Glorfindel shuddered as he took it, but he looked intently at it. "There are evil things written on this hilt," he said, "though maybe your eyes cannot see them. Keep it, Aragorn, till we reach the house of Elrond, but be wary and handle it as little as you may. Alas, the wounds of this weapon are beyond my skill to heal. I will do what I can, but all the more do I urge you now to go on without rest." He searched the wound on Frodo's shoulders with his fingers, and his face grew graver, as if what he learned disquieted him. But Frodo felt the chill lessen in his side and arm. A little warmth crept down from his shoulder to his hand, and the pain grew easier. The dusk of evening seemed to grow brighter about him, as if a cloud had been withdrawn. He saw his friends' faces more clearly again, and a measure of new hope and strength returned. We call that lay on hands. "You shall ride my horse," said Glorfindel. "I will shorten the stirrups up to the saddle skirts, and you must sit as tight as you can, but you need not fear. My horse will not let any rider fall that I command him to bear. His pace is light and smooth, and if danger presses too near, he will bear you away with a speed that even the black steeds of the enemy cannot rival." "No, he will not," said Frodo. "I shall not ride him, if I am to be carried off to Rivendell or anywhere else, leaving my friends behind in danger." Glorfindel smiled. "I doubt very much," he said, "if your friends would be in danger if you were not with them. The pursuit would follow you and leave us in peace, I think. It is you, Frodo, and that which you bear that brings us all in peril." To that, Frodo had no answer, and he was persuaded to mount Glorfindel's white horse. The pony was laden instead with a great part of the other's burdens, so that they now marched lighter, and for a time made good speed, but the hobbits began to find it hard to keep up with the swift, tireless feet of the elf. On he led them into the mouth of darkness, and still on under the deep clouded night. There was neither star nor moon. Not until the gray of dawn did he allow them to halt. "Woof." Pippin, Merry, and Sam were by that time nearly asleep on their stumbling legs, and even Strider seemed by the sag of his shoulders to be weary. Frodo sat upon the horse in a dark dream. They cast themselves down in the heather a few yards from the roadside, and fell asleep immediately. They seemed hardly to have closed their eyes when Glorfindel, who had set himself to watch while they slept, awoke them again. The sun had now climbed far into the morning, and the clouds and mists of the night were gone. "Drink this," said Glorfindel to them, pouring for each in turn a little liquor from his silver-studded flask of leather. It was clear as spring water and had no taste, and it did not feel either cool or warm in the mouth, but strength and vigor seemed to flow into all their limbs as they drank it. Eaten after that draught, the stale bread and dried fruit, which was now all they had left, seemed to satisfy their hunger better than many a good breakfast in the Shire had done. They had rested rather less than 5 hours when they took to the road again. Glorfindel still urged them on, and only allowed 2 brief halts during the day's march. In this way they covered almost 20 miles before nightfall. It came to a point where the road bent right and ran down towards the bottom of the valley, now making straight for the Bruinen. So far there had been no sign or sound of pursuit that the hobbits could see or hear, but often Glorfindel would halt and listen for a moment. If they lagged behind, and a look of anxiety clouded his face. Once or twice he spoke to Strider in the elf tongue. But now anxious their guides might be, it was plain that the hobbits could go no further that night. They were stumbling along dizzy with weariness, and unable to think of anything but their feet and legs. Frodo's pain had redoubled, and during the day things about him faded to shadows of ghostly gray. He almost welcomed the coming of night, for then the world seemed less pale and empty. Ew. The hobbits were still weary when they set out again early next morning. There were many miles yet to go between them and the ford, and they hobbled forward at the best pace they could manage. "Our peril will be greatest just ere we reach the river," said Glorfindel, "for my heart warns me that the pursuit is now swift behind us, and the other danger may be waiting by the ford." The road was still running steadily downhill, and there was now in places much grass at either side, in which the hobbits walked when they could, to ease their tired feet. In the late afternoon they came to a place where the road went suddenly under the dark shadow of tall pine trees, and then plunged into a deep cutting with steep, moist walls of red stone. Echoes ran along as they hurried forward, and there seemed to be a sound of many footfalls following their own. All at once, as if through a gate of light, the road ran out again from the end of the tunnel into the open. There at the bottom of a sharp incline, they saw before them a long, flat mile, and beyond that the ford of Rivendell. On the further side was a steep brown bank, threaded by a winding path, and behind that tall mountains climbed, shoulder above shoulder, and peak beyond peak, into the fading sky. There was still an echo, as of following feet in the cutting behind them, a rushing noise, as if a wind were rising and pouring through the branches of the pines. One moment Glorfindel turned and listened, then he sprang forward with a loud cry. "Fly," he called. "Fly, the enemy is upon us." The white horse leapt forward. The hobbits ran down the slope. Glorfindel and Strider followed as rear guard. They were only halfway across the flat, when suddenly there was a noise of horses galloping. Out of the gate in the trees that they had just left rode a black rider. He reined his horse in and halted, swaying in his saddle. Another followed him, and then another, and then 2 more. "Ride forward, ride!" cried Glorfindel to Frodo. He did not obey at once, for a strange reluctance seized him. Checking the horse to a walk, he turned and looked back. The riders seemed to sit upon their great steeds like threatening statues upon a hill, dark and solid. Solid. Again, with the whole ethereal, ghosty beings with boots and cloaks and solidness. It's very interesting. So, anyway, dark and solid, while all the woods and land about them receded as if into a mist. Suddenly he knew in his heart that they were silently commanding him to wait. Then at once fear and hatred awoke in him. His hand left the bridle and gripped the hilt of his sword, and with a red flash he drew it. Ride on, cried Glorfindel, and then loud and clear he called to the horse in the elf tongue, Noralim, Noralim, Asphaloth. Asphaloth, At once the white horse sprang away and sped like wind along the last lap of the road. At the same moment the black horses leapt down the hill in pursuit, and from the riders came a terrible cry, such as Frodo had heard filling the woods with horror in the Eastfarthing far away. It was answered, and to the dismay of Frodo and his friend, out from the trees and rocks, away... Sorry, I got lost in that sentence. To the dismay of Frodo and his friend, out from the trees and rocks, away to the left, 4 other riders came flying. I assume his friend... It's friend, singular. I'm assuming that's the horse? I don't know. It's a little confusing. Anyway. 4 other riders came flying. 2 rode towards Frodo. 2 galloped madly towards the ford to cut off his escape. They seemed to him to run like the wind, and to grow swiftly larger and darker as their courses converged with his. Frodo looked back for a moment over his shoulder. He could no longer see his friends. That's plural. The riders behind were falling back. Even their great steeds were no match in speed for the white elf horse of Glorfindel. He looked forward again, and hope faded. There seemed no chance of reaching the ford before he was cut off by the others that had lain in ambush. He could see them clearly now. They appeared to have cast aside their hoods and black cloaks, and they were robed in white and gray. Swords were naked in their pale hands, helms were upon their heads. Their cold eyes glittered, and they called to him with fell voices. Fear now filled all Frodo's mind. He thought no longer of his sword. No cry came from him. He shut his eyes and clung to the horse's mane. The wind whistled in his ears, and the bells upon the harness rang wild and shrill. A breath of deadly cold pierced him like a spear, as with a last spurt, like a flash of white fire, the elf horse, speeding as if on wings, passed right before the face of the foremost rider. Frodo heard the splash of water. It foamed about his feet. He felt the quick heave and surge as the horse left the river and struggled up the stony path. He was climbing up the steep bank. He was across the ford. But the pursuers were close behind. The wrong side of the river? At the top of the bank, the horse halted and turned, about neighing fiercely. There were 9 riders at the water's edge below. At the wrong side of the river. And Frodo's spirit quailed before the... I'm sorry, I'm ruining the moment. My bad. Frodo's spirit quailed before the threat of their uplifted faces. He knew nothing that would prevent them from crossing as easily as he had done, and he felt that it was useless to try to escape over the long, uncertain path from the ford to the edge of Rivendell, if once the riders crossed. In any case, he felt that he was commanded urgently to halt. Hatred again stirred in him, but he had no longer the strength to refuse. Suddenly, the foremost rider spurred his horse forward. It checked at the water and reared up. With a great effort, Frodo sat upright and brandished his sword. "Go back," he cried. "Go back to the land of Mordor and follow me no more." His voice sounded thin and shrill in his own ears. The riders halted, but Frodo had not the power of Bombadil. His enemies laughed at him with a harsh and chilling laughter. "Come back. "Come back," they called. "To Mordor we will take you." "Go back," he whispered. "The ring, the ring," they cried with deadly voices, and immediately their leader urged his horse forward into the water, followed closely by 2 others. "By Elbereth and Luthien the Fair," said Frodo with a last effort, lifting up his sword, "you shall have neither the ring nor me." Then the leader, who was now halfway across the ford, stood up menacing in his stirrups and raised his hand. Frodo was stricken dumb. He felt his tongue cleave to his mouth and his heart laboring. His sword broke and fell out of his shaking hand. The elf horse reared and snorted. The foremost of the black horses had almost set foot upon the shore. At that moment there came a roar and a rushing, a noise of loud waters rolling many stones. Dimly Frodo saw the river below him rise, and down along its course there came a plumed cavalry of waves. White flames seemed to Frodo to flicker on their crests, and he half fancied that he saw amid the water white riders upon white horses with frothing manes. The 3 riders that were still in the midst of the ford were overwhelmed. They disappeared, buried suddenly under angry foam. Those that were behind drew back in dismay. With his last failing senses, Frodo heard cries, and it seemed to him that he saw, beyond the riders that hesitated on the shore, a shining figure of white light, and behind it ran a small shadowy forms waving flames that flared red in the gray mist that was falling over the world. The black horses were filled with madness, and leaping forward in terror they bore their riders into the rushing flood. Their piercing cries were drowned in the roaring of the river as it carried them away. Then Frodo felt himself falling, and the roaring and confusion seemed to rise and engulf him together with his enemies. He heard and saw no more. And that's book 1 of book 1, The Fellowship of the Ring. I am so excited. We're gonna wake up in Rivendell. I'm just checking what our time is like, because I got started late. Gonna sing a little more. Oh, that's not too bad. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Huh. I'm gonna have to edit my title as well, and have it be chapter 12-1. Again, that's gonna be real confusing. I'll have to figure that out. Anyway, let's meet Elrond. Book 2, Chapter 1. Again, many meetings. Frodo woke and found himself lying in bed. At first he thought he had slept late, after a long unpleasant dream that still hovered on the edge of memory. Or perhaps he had been ill. But the ceiling looked strange. It was flat, and it had dark beams richly carved. He lay a little while longer, looking at patches of sunlight on the wall, and listening to the sound of a waterfall. "Where am I? What is the time?" he said aloud to the ceiling. "In the house of Elrond, and it is 10 o'clock in the morning," said a voice. "It is the morning of October the 24th, if you want to know." "Gandalf!" cried Frodo, sitting up. There was the old wizard, sitting in a chair by the open window. "Yes," he said, "I am here." Sorry, I'm laughing. "And you are lucky to be here, too, after all the absurd things you have done since you left home." Frodo lay down again. He felt too comfortable and peaceful to argue, and in any case, he did not think he would get the better of an argument. He was fully awake now, and the memory of his journey was returning. The disastrous shortcut through the old forest, the accident of the prancing pony, and his madness in putting on the ring in the dell under Weathertop. While he was thinking of all these things, and trying in vain to bring his memory down to his arriving in Rivendell, there was a long silence, broken only by the soft puffs of Gandalf's pipe, as he blew white smoke rings out the window. "Where's Sam?" Frodo asked at length. "And are the others all right?" "Yes, they are all safe and sound," answered Gandalf. "Sam was here until I sent him off to get some rest, about half an hour ago." "What happened at the ford?" said Frodo. "It all seemed so dim, somehow, and still does." "Yes, it would. You were beginning to fade," answered Gandalf. "The wound was overcoming you at last. A few more hours, and you would have been beyond our aid. But you have some strength in you, my dear hobbit, as you showed in the barrow. That was touch and go, perhaps the most dangerous moment of all. I wish you could have held out at Weatherdeep." "You seem to know a great deal already," said Frodo. "I have not spoken to the others about the barrow. At first it was too horrible, and afterwards there were other things to think about. How do you know about it?" "You have talked long in your sleep, Frodo," said Gandalf gently, "and it has not been hard for me to read your mind and memory. Do not worry. Though I said absurd just now, I did not mean it. I think well of you and of the others. It is no small feat to have come so far, and through such great dangers, still bearing the ring." "We should never have done it without Strider," said Frodo. "But we needed you. I did not know what to do without you." "I was delayed," said Gandalf, "and that nearly proved our ruin. And yet I am not sure. It may have been better so. I wish you would tell me what happened." "All in good time. You're not supposed to talk or worry about anything today, by Elrond's orders." "But talking would stop me thinking and wondering, which are quite as tiring," said Frodo. "I'm wide awake now, and I remember so many things that want explaining. Why were you delayed? You ought to tell me that at least." "You will hear all you wish to know," said Gandalf. "We shall call a council as soon as you are well enough. At the moment, I will only say that I was held captive." "You!" cried Frodo. "Yes, I, Gandalf the Grey," said the wizard solemnly. "There are many powers in the world, for good or for evil. Some are greater than I am. Against some I have not yet been measured, but my time is coming. The Morgul Lord and his Black Riders have come forth. War is preparing." "Then you knew of the riders already, before I met them?" "Yes, I knew of them. Indeed, I spoke of them once to you, for the Black Riders are the ring wraiths, the 9 servants of the Lord of the Rings. But I did not know that they had arisen again, or I should have fled with you at once. I heard news of them only after I left you in June, but that story must wait. For the moment we have been saved from disaster by Aragorn." "Yes," said Frodo. "It was Strider that saved us, yet I was afraid of him at first. Sam never quite trusted him, I think, not at any rate until we met Glorfindel." Gandalf smiled. "I have heard all about Sam," he said. "He has no more doubts now." "I am glad," said Frodo, "for I've become very fond of Strider. Well, fond is not the right word. I mean, he is dear to me, though he is strange and grim at times. In fact, he reminds me often of you. I didn't know that any of the big people were like that. I thought, well, that they were just big and rather stupid. Kind and stupid like Butterbur, or stupid and wicked like Bill Ferny. But then, we don't know much about men in the Shire, except perhaps the Breelanders." "You don't know much even about them if you think old Barlaman is stupid," said Gandalf. "He is wise enough on his own ground. He thinks less than he talks, and slower, yet he can see through a brick wall in time, as they say in Bree. But there are few left in Middle-earth like Aragorn, son of Arathorn. The race of the kings from over the sea is nearly at an end. It may be that this War of the Ring will be their last adventure." "Do you really mean that Strider is one of the people of the old kings?" said Frodo in wonder. "I thought they had all vanished long ago. I thought he was only a ranger." "Only a ranger?" cried Gandalf. "My dear Frodo, that is just what the rangers are. The last remnant in the north helped me before, and I shall need their help in the days of the great people, the men of the West." "Eh? They have to come, for we have reached Rivendell, but the ring is not yet at rest." "I suppose not," said Frodo. "But so far my only thought has been to get here, and I hope I shan't have to go any further. It is very pleasant just to rest. I've had a month of exile and adventure, and I find it has been as much as I want." He fell silent and shut his eyes. After a while he spoke again. "I have been reckoning," he said, "that I can't bring the total up to October the 24th. It ought to be the 21st. We must have reached the ford by the 20th. "You have talked and reckoned more than is good for you," said Gandalf. "How do the side and shoulder feel now?" "I don't know," Frodo answered. "They don't feel at all, which is an improvement, but—" He made an effort. "I can move my arm again a little. Yes, it is coming back to life. It is not cold," he added, touching the left hand with his right. "Good," said Gandalf. "It is mending fast. You will soon be sound again. Elrond has cured you. He has tended you for days, ever since you were brought in." "Days," said Frodo. "Well, 4 nights and 3 days, to be exact. The elves brought you from the ford on the night of the 20th, and that is where you lost count. We have been terribly anxious, and Sam has hardly left your side, day or night, except to run messages. Elrond is a master of healing, but the weapons of our enemy are deadly. To tell you the truth, I had very little hope, for I suspected that there was some fragment of the blade still in the closed wound, but it could not be found until last night. Then Elrond removed a splinter. It was deeply buried, and it was working inwards." Frodo shuddered, remembering the cruel knife with notched blade that had vanished in Strider's hands. "Don't be alarmed," said Gandalf. "It is gone now. It has been melted." That's such a weird sentence. "And it seems that hobbits fade very reluctantly. I've known strong warriors of the big people who would quickly have been overcome by that splinter, which you bore for 17 days. "What would they have done to me?" asked Frodo. "What were the riders trying to do?" "They tried to pierce your heart with a Morgul knife, which remains in the wounded. If they had succeeded, you would have become like they are, only weaker and under their command. You would have become a wraith under the dominion of the Dark Lord, and he would have tormented you for trying to keep his ring, if any greater torment were possible than being robbed of it and seeing it on his hand." "Thank goodness I did not realize the horrible danger," said Frodo faintly. "I was mortally afraid, of course, but if I had known more, I should not have dared even to move. It is a marvel that I escaped." "Yes, fortune or fate have helped you," said Gandalf, "not to mention courage, for your heart was not touched, and only your shoulder was pierced, and that was because you resisted to the last. But it was terribly narrow shave, so to speak. You were in gravest peril while you wore the ring, and then you were half in the wraith world yourself, and they might have seized you. You could see them, and they could see you." "I know," said Frodo. "They were terrible to behold. But why could we all see their horses?" "Because they are real horses, just as the black robes are real robes that they wear to give shape to their nothingness when they have dealings with the living." "Oh. Then why do these black horses endure such riders? I don't want to know. All other animals are terrified when they draw near, even the elf horse of Glorfindel. The dogs howl and the geese scream at them, to be fair." "Geese scream at everybody." "Because these horses are born and bred to the service of the Dark Lord in Mordor. Not all his servants and chattels are wraiths." "What a word!" "There are orcs and trolls, there are wargs and werewolves, and there have been and still are many men, warriors and kings, that walk alive under the sun and yet are under his sway, and their number is growing daily." "What about Rivendell and the elves? Is Rivendell safe?" "Yes, at present, until all else is conquered." The elves may fear the Dark Lord, and they may fly before him, but never again will they listen to him or serve him. Here in Rivendell there live still some of his chief foes, the Elven-wise, lords of the Elder from beyond the furthest seas. They do not fear the ring-wraiths, for those who have dwelt in the Blessed Realm live at once in both worlds, and against both the seen and the unseen they have great power. I thought that I saw a white figure that shone and did not grow dim like the others. Was that Glorfindel, then? Yes, you saw him for a moment as he is upon the other side, one of the mighty of the firstborn. He is an elf lord of a house of princes. Indeed, there is a power in Rivendell to withstand the might of Mordor, for a while, and elsewhere other powers still dwell. There is power, too, of another kind in the Shire, but all such places will soon become islands under siege, if things go on as they are going, the Dark Lord's putting forth all his strength. Still, he said, standing suddenly up and sticking out his chin, while his beard went stiff and straight like bristling wire. We must keep up our courage. Okay. You will soon be well, if I do not talk you to death. You are in Rivendell, and you need not worry about anything for the present. I haven't any courage to keep up, said Frodo, but I'm not worried at the moment. Just give me news of my friends, and tell me the end of the affair at the ford, as I keep on asking, and I shall be content for the present. After that I shall have another sleep, I think, but I shan't be able to close my eyes until you have finished the story for me. Gandalf moved his chair to the bedside and took a good look at Frodo. The color had come back to his face, and his eyes were clear, and fully awake and aware. He was smiling, and there seemed to be little wrong with him. But to the wizard's eye there was a faint change, just a hint, as it were, of transparency about him, and especially about the left hand that lay outside upon the coverlet. Still, that must be expected, said Gandalf to himself. He is not half through yet, and to what he will come in the end, not even Elrond can foretell. Not to evil, I think. He may become like a glass filled with a clear light for eyes to see that can. You look splendid, he said aloud. I will risk a brief tale without consulting Elrond, but quite brief, mind you, and then you must sleep again. This is what happened, as far as I can gather. The riders made straight for you, as soon as you fled. They did not need the guidance of their horses any longer. You had become visible to them, being already on the threshold of their world. And also, the ring drew them. Your friends sprang aside, off the road, or they would have been ridden down. They knew that nothing could save you, if the white horse could not. The riders were too swift to overtake, and too many to oppose. On foot, even Glorfindel and Aragorn together could not withstand all the 9 at once. When the ring-wraiths swept by, your friends ran up behind. Close to the ford there was a small hollow beside the road, masked by a few stunted trees. There they hastily kindled fire, for Glorfindel knew that a flood would come down if the riders tried to cross, and then he would have to deal with any that were left on the side of the river. On his side of the river. The moment the flood appeared, he rushed out, followed by Aragorn and the others with flaming brands. Caught between fire and water, and seeing an elf lord revealed in his wrath, they were dismayed, and their horses were stricken with madness. 3 were carried away by the first assault of the flood. The others were now hurled into the water by their horses and overwhelmed. And is that the end of the Black Riders? Asked Frodo. No, said Gandalf. Their horses must have perished, and without them they are crippled. But the ring-wraiths themselves cannot be so easily destroyed. However, there is nothing more to fear from them at present. Your friends crossed after the flood had passed, and they found you lying on your face at the top of the bank with a broken sword under you. The horse was standing guard beside you. You were pale and cold, and they feared that you were dead, or worse. Elrond's folk met them, carrying you slowly towards Rivendell. Who made the flood? Asked Frodo. Elrond commanded it, answered Gandalf. The river of this valley is under his power, and it will rise in anger when he has great need to bar the ford. As soon as the captain of the ring-wraiths rode into the water, the flood was released. If I may say so, I added a few touches of my own. You may not have noticed, but some of the waves took the form of great white horses with shining white riders, and there were many rolling and grinding boulders. For a moment I was afraid that we had let loose too fierce a wrath, and the flood would get out of hand and wash you all away. There was great vigor in the waters that come down from the snows of the misty mountains. Yes, it all comes back to me now, said Frodo. The tremendous roaring. I thought I was drowning, with my friends and enemies and all. But now we are safe. Gandalf looked quickly at Frodo, but he had shut his eyes. Yes, you are all safe for the present. Soon there will be feasting and merrymaking to celebrate the victory at the ford of Bruinen, and you will all be there in places of honor. Splendid, said Frodo. It is wonderful that Elrond and Glorfindel, and such great lords, not to mention Strider, should take so much trouble and show me so much kindness. Well, there are many reasons why they should, said Gandalf, smiling. I am one good reason. The ring is another. You are the ring-bearer, and you are the heir of Bilbo, the ring-finder. Dear Bilbo, said Frodo sleepily, I wonder where he is. I wish he was here and could hear all about it. It would have made him laugh. The cow jumped over the moon, and the poor old troll. With that he fell fast asleep. And for those of us who know what's coming, foreshadowing. That's not really foreshadowing, that's just being silly. Water, need a little water. It's only 10:30. I'm getting sleepy myself. Oh, we got a big song. Okay. Let's go meet Elrond. Frodo was now safe in the last homely house east of the sea. That house was, as Bilbo had long ago reported, a perfect house, whether you like food or sleep or storytelling or singing, or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasant mixture of them all. Merely to be there was a cure for weariness, fear, and sadness. As the evening drew on, Frodo woke up again, and he found that he no longer felt in need of rest or sleep, but had a mind for food and drink, and probably for singing and storytelling afterwards. He got out of bed and discovered that his arm was already nearly as useful again as it had ever been. What a way to phrase that sentence! He found laid ready clean garments of green cloth that fitted him excellently. Looking in a mirror, he was startled to see a much thinner reflection of himself than he remembered. It looked remarkably like the young nephew of Bilbo, who used to go tramping with his uncle in the Shire. But the eyes looked out at him thoughtfully. Yes, you have seen a thing or two since you last peeped out of a looking-glass, he said to his reflection. But now for a merry meeting. He stretched out his arms and whistled a tune. At that moment there was a knock on the door, and Sam came in. He ran to Frodo and took his left hand, awkwardly and shyly. He stroked it gently, and then he blushed and turned hastily away. "Hello, Sam," said Frodo. "It's warm," said Sam, "meaning your hand, Mr. Frodo. It's felt so cold through the long nights. But glory and trumpets. Okay," he cried, turning round again with shining eyes and dancing on the floor. "It is fine to see you up and yourself again, sir. Gandalf asked me to come and see if you were ready to come down, and I thought he was joking." "I am ready," said Frodo. "Let's go and look for the rest of the party." "I can take you to them, sir," said Sam. "It is a big house, this, and very peculiar. Always a bit more to discover, and no knowing what you'll find around a corner. And elves, sir, elves here and elves there. Some like kings, terrible and splendid, and some as merry as children. And the music and the singing. Not that I've had the time or the heart for much listening since we got here, but I'm getting to know some of the ways of the place." "I know what you've been doing, Sam," said Frodo, taking his arm. "But you shall be merry tonight, and listen to your heart's content. Come on, guide me round the corners." Sam led him along several passages and down many steps and out into a high garden above a steep bank of the river. He found his friend sitting in a porch on the side of the house, looking east. Shadows had fallen in the valley below, but there was still light on the faces of the mountains far above. The air was warm. The sound of running and falling water was loud, and the evening was filled with the faint scent of trees and flowers, as if summer still lingered in Elrond's gardens. "Hooray!" cried Pippin, springing up. "Here is our noble cousin. Oh, make way for Frodo, Lord of the Ring." "Hush," said Gandalf from the shadows at the back of the porch. "Evil things do not come into this valley, but all the same we should not name them. The Lord of the Ring is not Frodo, but the master of the Dark Tower of Mordor, whose power is again stretching out over the world. We are sitting in a fortress. Outside it is getting dark." "Gandalf has been saying many cheerful things like that," said Pippin. "He thinks I need keeping in order, but it seems impossible somehow to feel gloomy or depressed in this place. I feel I could sing if I knew the right song for the occasion." "I feel like singing myself," laughed Frodo, "though at the moment I feel more like eating and drinking." "That will soon be cured," said Pippin. "You have shown your usual cunning in getting up just in time for a meal." "More than a meal, a feast," said Merry. As soon as Gandalf reported that you were recovered, the preparations began. He had hardly finished speaking when they were summoned to the hall by the ringing of many bells. The hall of Elrond's house was filled with folk, elves for the most part, though there were a few guests of other sorts. Elrond, as was his custom, sat in a great chair at the end of a long table upon the dais, and next to him, on one side, sat Glorfindel, on the other side sat Gandalf. Frodo looked at them in wonder, for he had never before seen Elrond, of whom so many tales spoke, and as they sat upon his right hand and his left, Glorfindel, and even Gandalf, whom he thought he knew so well, were revealed as lords of dignity and power. Gandalf was shorter in stature than the other two, but his long white hair, his sweeping silver beard, and his broad shoulders made him look like some wise king of ancient legend. In his aged face, under great snowy brows, his dark eyes were set like coals that could leap suddenly into fire. Glorfindel was tall and straight. His hair was of shining gold, and his face fair and young and fearless and full of joy. His eyes were bright and keen, and his voice like music. On his brow sat wisdom, and in his hand was strength. The face of Elrond was ageless, neither old nor young, though in it was written the memory of many things, both glad and sorrowful. His hair was dark as the shadows of twilight, and upon it was set a circlet of silver. His eyes were gray as a clear evening, and in them was a light like the light of stars. Venerable he seemed as a king, crowned with many winters, and yet hale as a tried warrior in the fullness of his strength. He was the Lord of Rivendell, and mighty among both elves and men. In the middle of the table, against the woven cloths upon the wall, there was a chair under a canopy, and there sat a lady fair to look upon, and so like was she in form of womanhood to Elrond, that Frodo guessed that she was one of his close kindred. Young she was, and yet not so. The braids of her dark hair were touched by no frost. Her white arms and clear face were flawless and smooth, and the light of stars was in her bright eyes, gray as a cloudless night, yet queenly she looked. And thought and knowledge were in her glance, as of one who has known many things that the years bring. Above her brow her head was covered with a cap of silver lace knitted with small gems, glimmering white, but her soft gray raiment had no ornament save a girdle of leaves wrought in silver. So it was that Frodo saw her whom few mortals had yet seen, Arwen, daughter of Elrond, in whom it was said that the likeness of Luthien had come on earth again, and she was called Indomiel, for she was the Evenstar of her people. Long ago she had been in the land of her mother's kin, in Lorien beyond the mountains, but was lately returned to Rivendell, to her father's house. But her brothers, Elladan and Elrohir, were out upon errantry, for they rode often far afield with the rangers of the north, forgetting never their mother's torment in the dens of the orcs. Such loveliness in living thing Frodo had never seen before, nor imagined in his mind, and he was both surprised and abashed to find that he had a seat at Elrond's table among all these folk so high and fair. We get it. We get it, Tolkien. You have a thing for it. We get it. Though he had a suitable chair, and was raised upon several cushions, he felt very small, and rather out of place, but that feeling quickly passed. The feast was merry, and the food all that his hunger could desire. It was some time before he looked about him again, or even turned to his neighbors. He looked first for his friends. Sam had begged to be allowed to wait on his master, but he had been told that for this time he was a guest of honor. Frodo could see him now, sitting with Pippin and Merry at the upper end of one of the side tables close to the dais. He could see no sign of Strider. Next to Frodo, on his right, sat a dwarf of important appearance, richly dressed. His beard, very long and forked, was white, and nearly as white as the snow-white cloth of his garments. He wore a silver belt, and round his neck hung a chain of silver and diamonds. Frodo stopped eating to look at him. "Welcome and well met," said the dwarf, turning towards him. Then he actually rose from his seat and bowed. "Glowin, at your service," he said, and bowed still lower. "Frodo Baggins, at your service and your family," said Frodo correctly, rising in surprise and scattering his cushions. "Am I right in guessing that you are the Glowin, one of the 12 companions of the great Thorin Oakenshield?" "Quite right," answered the dwarf, gathering up the cushions and courteously assisting Frodo back into his seat. "And I do not ask, for I have already been told that you are the kinsman and adopted heir of our friend Bilbo the Renowned. Allow me to congratulate you on your recovery." "Thank you very much," said Frodo. "You've had some very strange adventures, I hear," said Glowin. "I wonder greatly what brings 4 hobbits on so long a journey. Nothing like has happened since Bilbo came with us. But perhaps I should not inquire too closely, since Elrond and Gandalf do not seem disposed to talk of this." "I think we will not speak of it, at least not yet," said Frodo politely. He guessed that even in Elrond's house the matter of the ring was not one for casual talk, and in any case he wished to forget his troubles for a time. "But I am equally curious," he added, "to learn what brings so important a dwarf so far from the Lonely Mountain." Glowin looked at him. "If you have not heard, I think we will not speak yet of that either. Master Elrond will summon us all ere long, I believe, and then we shall all hear many things. But there is much else that may be told." Throughout the rest of the meal they all talked together, but Frodo listened more than he spoke, for the news of the Shire, apart from the ring, seemed small and far away and unimportant, while Glowin had much to tell of events in the northern regions of Wilderland. Frodo learned that Grimbeorn, the old son of Beorn, was now lord of many sturdy men, and to their land between the mountains and Mirkwood neither orc nor wolf dared to go. "Well, that's not great. Wolves are important species for the ecosystem." Maybe they mean warg, I don't know. "Indeed," said Glowin. "If it were not for the Beornings, the passage from Dale to Rivendell would long ago have become impossible. They are valiant men and keep open the High Pass and the ford of Carrick, but their tolls are high," he added with a shake of his head, "and like Beorn of old, they are not over fond of dwarves. Still, they are trusty, and that is much in these days. Nowhere are there any men so friendly to us as the men of Dale. They are good folk, the Bardings. The grandson of Bard the Bowman rules them, and Bran, son of Bane, son of Bard. He is a strong king, and his realm now reaches far south and east of Esgaroth." "And what of your own people?" asked Frodo. "There is much to tell, good and bad," said Glowin. "Yet it is mostly good. We have been So we have so far been fortunate, though we did not escape the shadow of these times. If you really wish to hear of us, I will tell you tidings gladly, but stop me when you are weary. Dwarves' tongues run on when speaking of their handiwork, they say. And with that, Glowin embarked on a long account of the doings of the dwarf kingdom. He was delighted to have found so polite a listener, for Frodo showed no sign of weariness and made no attempt to change the subject. Though actually, he soon got rather lost among the strange names of people and places that he had never heard of before. He was interested, however, to hear that Dane was still king under the mountain, and was now old, having passed 250th year, venerable and fabulously rich. Of the 10 companions who had survived the Battle of 5 Armies, 7 were still with him: Dwalin, Glowin, Dori, Nori, Bifur, Boffer, and Bombur. Bombur was now so fat that he could not move himself from his couch to his chair at table, and it took 6 young dwarfs to lift him. "And what has become of Balin, and Ori, and Owen?" asked Frodo. A shadow passed over Glowin's face. "We do not know," he answered. "It is largely on account of Balin that I have come to ask the advice of those that dwell in Rivendell. But tonight let us speak of merrier things." Glowin began to talk of the work of his people, telling Frodo about their great labors in Dale and under the mountain. "We have done well," he said, "but in metalwork we cannot rival our fathers, many of whose secrets are lost. We make good armor and keen swords, but we cannot again make mail or blade to match those that were made before the dragon came. Only in mining and building have we surpassed the old days. You should see the waterways of Dale, Frodo, and the mountains, and the pools. You should see the stone-paved roads of many colors, and the halls and cavernous streets under the earth with arches carved like trees, and the terraces and towers upon the mountain sides. Then you would see that we have not been idle." "I will come and see them if I ever can," said Frodo. How surprised Bilbo would have been to see all the changes in the desolation of Smaug. Glowin looked at Frodo and smiled. "You were very fond of Bilbo, were you not?" he asked. "Yes," answered Frodo. "I would rather see him than all the towers and places in the world." "Why are you stringing us along?" At length, the feast came to an end. Elrond and Arwen rose and went down the hall, and the company followed them in due order. The doors were thrown open, and they went across a wide passage and through other doors, and came into a further hall. In it were no tables, but a bright fire was burning in a great hearth between the carven pillars upon either side. Frodo found himself walking with Gandalf. "This is the Hall of Fire," said the wizard. "Here you will hear many songs and tales, if you can keep awake. But except on high days, it usually stands empty and quiet, and people come here who wish for peace and thought. There's always a fire here, all the year round, but there's little other light." As Elrond entered and went towards the seat prepared for him, elvish minstrels began to make sweet music. Slowly the hall filled, and Frodo looked with delight upon the many fair faces that were gathered together. The golden firelight played upon them and shimmered in their hair. Suddenly he noticed, not far from the further end of the fire, a small dark figure seated on a stool with his back propped against a pillar. Beside him on the ground was a drinking cup and some bread. Frodo wondered whether he was ill, if people were ever ill in Rivendell, and had been unable to come to the feast. His head seemed sunk in sleep upon his breast, and a fold of his dark cloak was drawn over his face. Elrond went forward and stood beside the silent figure. "Awake, little master," he said with a smile. Then, turning to Frodo, he beckoned to him. "Now at last the hour has come that you wished for, Frodo," he said. "Here is a friend that you have long missed." The dark figure raised its head and uncovered its face. "Bilbo!" cried Frodo with sudden recognition, and he sprang forward. "Hello, Frodo, my lad," said Bilbo. "So you've got here at last. I hoped you would manage it. Well, well, so all this feasting is in your honor, I hear. I hope you enjoyed yourself." "Why weren't you there?" cried Frodo. Why haven't I been allowed to see you before? Because you were asleep. I've seen a good deal of you. I've sat by your side with Sam each day. But as for the feast, I don't go in for such things as now, and I have something else to do. What were you doing? Why, sitting and thinking. I do a lot of that nowadays, and this is the best place to do it in, as a rule. Wake up, indeed, he said, cocking an eye at Elrond. There was a bright twinkle in it, and no sign of sleepiness that Frodo could see. Wake up. I was not asleep, Master Elrond, if you want to know. You have all come out from your feast too soon, and you have disturbed me, in the middle of making up a song. Which I no doubt is what I'm about to read soon. I was stuck over a line or two, and was thinking about them, but now I don't suppose I shall ever get them right. There will be such a deal of singing that the ideas will be driven clean out of my head. I shall have to get my friend the Dunedain to help me. Where is he? Elrond laughed. He shall be found, he said. Then you shall go to a corner and finish your task. We will hear it and judge it before we end our merrymaking. Messengers were sent to find Bilbo's friend. Why are you being so secretive? What? Though none knew where he... It's the other person who wasn't at the feast. Or why he had not been present at the feast. In the meanwhile, Frodo and Bilbo sat side by side, and Sam came quickly and placed himself near them. They talked together in soft voices, oblivious of the mirth and music in the hall about them. Bilbo had not much to say of himself. When he had left Hobbiton, he had wandered off aimlessly, along the road or in the country on either side, but somehow he had steered all the time towards Rivendell. I got here without much adventure, he said, and after a rest I went on with the dwarves to Dale. My last journey. I shan't travel again. Old Balin had gone away. Then I came back here, and here I have been. I've done this and that, and have written some more of my book, and of course I make up a few songs. They sing them occasionally, just to please me, I think, for of course they aren't really good enough for Rivendell. And I listen and think. Time doesn't seem to pass here. It just is. A remarkable place altogether. I hear all kinds of news from over the mountains and out of the south, but hardly anything from the Shire. I heard about the ring, of course. Gandalf has been here often. Not that he has told me a great deal. He's become closer than ever these past few years. The Dunedain has told me more. Fancy that ring of mine causing such a disturbance. It's a pity that Gandalf did not find out more sooner. I could have brought the thing here myself not long ago, or I could have brought the thing here myself long ago, without so much trouble. I've thought several times going back to Hobbiton for it, but I'm getting old, and they would not let me. Gandalf and Elrond, I mean. They seemed to think that the enemy was looking high and low for me, and would make mincemeat of me, if he caught me tottering about in the wild. And Gandalf said, "The ring has passed on, Bilbo. It would do no good for you or to others if you tried to meddle with it again." Odd sort of remark, just like Gandalf. But he said he was looking after you, so I let things be. I'm frightfully glad to see you safe and sound. He paused and looked at Frodo doubtfully. I need a little sip of water here. In the middle of dialogue. My throat is getting dry. Have you got it here? He asked in a whisper. I can't help but feel curious, you know, after all I've heard. Should very much like just to peep at it again. Yes, I've got it, answered Frodo, feeling a strange reluctance. It looks the same as it ever did. Well, I should just like to see it for a moment, said Bilbo. When he had dressed, Frodo found that while he slept, the ring had been hung about his neck on a new chain, light but strong. Slowly he drew it out. Bilbo put out his hand, but Frodo quickly drew the ring back. To his distress and amazement, he found that he was no longer looking at Bilbo. A shadow seemed to have fallen between them, and through it he found himself eyeing a little wrinkled creature with a hungry face and bony, groping hands. He felt a desire to strike him. The music and singing round them seemed to falter, and a silence fell. Bilbo looked quickly at Frodo's face and passed his hand across his eyes. "I understand you now," he said. "Put it away. I'm sorry. Sorry you've come for this burden. Sorry about everything. Don't adventures ever have an end?" "I suppose not. Someone else always has to carry on the story. Well, it can't be helped. I wonder if it's any good trying to finish my book. But let's worry about it now. Let's have some real news. Tell me all about the Shire." Frodo hid the ring away, and the shadow passed, leaving hardly a shred of memory. The light and music of Rivendell were about him again. Bilbo smiled and laughed happily. Every item of news from the Shire that Frodo could tell, aided and corrected now and again by Sam, was of the greatest interest to him. From the felling of the last tree to the pranks of the smallest child in Hobbiton, they were so deep in the doings of the Four-Farthings they did not notice the arrival of a man clad in dark green cloth. For many minutes he stood looking down at them with a smile. Suddenly Bilbo looked up. "Ah, there you are at last, Dunedain," he cried. "Strider," said Frodo. "You seem to have a lot of names." "Well, Strider is one that I haven't heard before anyway," said Bilbo. "What do you call him that for?" "They call me that in Bree," said Strider, laughing. "And that is how I was introduced to him." "And why do you call him Dunedain?" "The Dunedain," said Bilbo. "He's often called that here. But I thought you knew enough Elvish at least to know Dunedain, Man of the West, Númenorian. But this is not the time for lessons." He turned to Strider. "Where have you been, my friend? Why weren't you at the feast? The Lady Arwen was there." Strider looked at Bilbo gravely. "I know," he said. "But often I must put mirth aside. Elladan and Elro here have returned out of the wild unlooked for, and they had tidings that I wished to hear at once." "Well, my dear fellow," said Bilbo, "now you've heard the news, can't you spare me a moment? I want your help in something urgent. Elrond says this song of mine is to be finished before the end of the evening, and I am stuck. Let's go off to a corner and polish it up." Strider smiled. "Come then," he said, "let me hear it." Yeah, I'm gonna have to read this one here in a little bit. I feel like he's giving us an extra dose of silliness because he feels bad that he just tried to scare us all. Frodo was left to himself for a while, for Sam had fallen asleep. He was alone and felt rather forlorn, although all about him the folk of Rivendell were gathered. But those near him were silent, intent upon the music of the voices and the instruments, and they gave no heed to anything else. Frodo began to listen. At first the beauty of the melodies and the interwoven words in the elven tongue, even though he understood them little, held him in a spell. As soon as he began to attend them, almost it seemed that the words took shape, and visions of far lands and bright things that he had never yet imagined opened out before him, and the firelit hall became like a golden mist above the seas of foam that sighed upon the margins of the world. Then the enchantment became more and more dreamlike, until he felt that an endless river of swelling gold and silver was flowing over him, too multitudinous for its patterns to be comprehended. It became part of the throbbing air about him, and it drenched and drowned him. Swiftly he sank under its shining weight into a deep realm of sleep. There he wandered long in a dream of music that turned into running water, then suddenly into a voice. It seemed to be the voice of Bilbo chanting verses. Faint at first, and then clearer ran the words. Eärendil was a mariner that tarried in Arvernian. He built a boat of timber felled in Nimbrethil to journey in. Her sails he wove of silver fair, Of silver were her lanterns made. Her prow was fashioned like a swan, and light upon her banners laid. In panoply of ancient kings, in chained rings he armored him. His shining shield was scored with runes, to ward all wounds and harm from him. His bow was made of dragon horn. His bow... Sorry, we were talking about boats. His bow was made of dragon horn. His arrows shorn of ebony. Of silver was his habergeon? Habergeon. Habergeon? His scabbard of chalcedony. I don't know where the stress goes on that, but I do know what that is. It's like a red stone. His sword of steel was valiant. Of adamant his helmet tall, an eagle plume upon his crest, upon his breast an emerald. Beneath the moon and under star he wandered far from northern strands, bewildered on enchanted ways, beyond the days of mortal lands. From gnashing of the narrow ice, where shadow lies on frozen hills, from nether heats and burning waste. He turned his haste in roving still, on starless waters far astray. At last he came to night of naught, and passed, and never sight he saw of shining shore, nor light he sought. The winds of wrath came driving him, and blindly in the foam he fled, from west to east, errandless, unheralded, he homeward sped. There flying Elwig came to him, and flame was in the darkness lit. More bright than light of diamond, the fire upon her carcanet, I don't know what that is. The Silmaril she bound on him, and crowned him with the living light, and dauntless then, with burning brow, he turned his prow, and in the night, from the other world beyond the sea, there strong and free a storm arose. A wind of power in Tarmanel, by paths that seldom mortal goes. His boat it bore with biting breath, as might of death across the grey and long forsaken seas distressed. From east to west he passed away. Through ever night he back was borne, on black and roaring waves that ran o'er leagues unlit, and foundered shores that drowned before the days began. Until he hears on strands of pearl where ends the world the music long, where ever foaming billows roll, the yellow gold and jewels wan. He saw the mountain silent rise, where twilight lies upon the knees of Valinor, and Eldamar held afar beyond the seas. A wanderer escaped from night. To haven white he came at last, to elven home, the green and fair, where keen the air, where pale as glass beneath the hill of Ilmarin, a glimmer in a valley sheer, the lamplit towers of Tirion are mirrored in the Shadowmere. He tarried there from errantry, and melodies they taught to him, and sages old his marvels told, and harps of gold they brought to him. They clothed him then in elven white, and 7 lights before him sent, as though the Calcurian to hidden land forlorn he went. He came unto the timeless halls, where shining fall the countless years, and endless reigns the elder king in Ilmarin and on mountain sheer. And words unheard were spoken then, of folk of men and elven kin, beyond the world where visions showed, forbid to those that dwell therein. A ship then new they built for him, of mithril and of elven glass, with shining prow, no shaven oar nor sail she bore on silver mast. The Silmaril as lantern light, and banner bright, with living flame, to gleam thereon by Elbereth herself was said, who hither came in wings immortal made for him, and laid on him undying doom, to sail the shoreless skies and come behind the sun and light of moon. From Everin's lofty hills, where softly silver fountains fall, his wings him bore, a wandering light, beyond the mighty mountain wall. From world's end, then he turned away, and yearned again to find afar his home through shadows journeying, and burning as an island star on high above the mists he came, a distant flame before the sun, a wonder ere the waking dawn, where gray the Norland waters run. And over Middle-earth he passed, and heard at last the weeping sore of women and of elven maids in elder days, in years of yore. But on him mighty doom was laid, till moon should fade and orbed star to pass, and tarry nevermore on hither shores where mortals are, or ever still a herald on an errand that should never rest, to bear his shining lamp afar in Flammifer of Westernesse. The chanting ceased. Frodo opened his eyes and saw that Bilbo was seated on his stool in a circle of listeners, who were smiling and applauding. "Now we better have it again," said an elf. Bilbo got up and bowed. "I am flattered, Lindir," he said, "but it would be too tiring to repeat it all." "Not too tiring for you," the elves answered, laughing. "You know you're never tired of reciting your own verses, but really we cannot answer your question at one hearing." "What?" cried Bilbo. "You can't tell which parts were mine and which were the Dunedain's?" "It's not easy for us to tell the difference between two mortals," said the elf. "Nonsense, Lindir," snorted Bilbo. "If you can't distinguish between a man and a hobbit, your judgment is poorer than I imagined. They're as different as peas and apples." "Maybe, but to sheep other sheep no doubt appear different," laughed Lindir. "Or to shepherds. But mortals have not been our study. We have other business." "I won't argue with you," said Bilbo. "I am sleepy after so much music and singing. I'll leave you to guess, if you want to." He got up and came towards Frodo. "Well, that's over," he said in a low voice. "Went off better than I expected. I don't often get asked for a second hearing. What did you think of it?" "I'm not going to try and guess," said Frodo, smiling. "You needn't. As a matter of fact, it was all mine, except that Aragorn insisted on my putting in a green stone. He seemed to think it important. Don't know why. Otherwise, he obviously thought the whole thing rather above my head, and he said that if I had the cheek to make verses about Arundel and the House of Elrond, it was my affair. Suppose he was right." "I don't know," said Frodo. "It seemed to me to fit, somehow, though I can't explain. I was halfway asleep when you began, and it seemed to follow on from something that I was dreaming about. Didn't understand what it was really you speaking until near the end." "It is difficult to keep awake here until you get used to it," said Bilbo. "Not that hobbits would ever acquire quite the elvish appetite for music and poetry and tales. They seem to like them as much as food, or more. They'll be going on for a long time yet. What do you say to slipping off for some more quiet talk?" "Can we?" said Frodo. "Of course, this is merrymaking, not business. Come and go as you like, as long as you don't make a noise." They got up and withdrew quietly to the shadows, and made for the doors. Sam they left behind, fast asleep, still with a smile on his face. In spite of his delight in Bilbo's company, Frodo felt a tug of regret as they passed out of the Hall of Fire. Even as they stepped over the threshold, a single clear voice rose in song. It's only a little bit, guys. But it's all in Elvish, and I'm gonna die." It's just him showing off, because he made this whole stinking language anyway. Elberelf Gilthoniel, Silivren Penamirio. It's like trying to read back when I was 6 and standing up and you get in front of all the people and it's words you don't understand anyway. Silivren Penamirio, Omenil Aglar Eleneth. Oh God. Nachered Palandirio, O Galeth Remen Enoreth, Fanwillos Le Linathon, Nef Sinef Arian. Frodo halted for a moment, looking back. Elrond was in his chair, and the fire was on his face like summer light upon the trees. Near him sat the Lady Arwen. To his surprise, Frodo saw that Aragorn stood beside her. His dark cloak was thrown back, and he seemed to be clad in elven mail. A star shone upon his breast. They spoke together, and then suddenly it seemed to Frodo that Arwen turned towards him, and the light of her eyes fell on him from afar and pierced his heart. He stood still enchanted, while the sweet syllables of the elvish song fell like clear jewels of blended word and melody. "It is a song to Elbereth," said Bilbo. "They will sing that and other songs of the Blessed Realm many times tonight. Come on." He led Frodo back to his own little room. It opened to the gardens and looked south across the ravine of the Bruinen. There they sat for some while, looking through the window at the bright stars above the steep climbing woods and talking softly. They spoke no more of small news of the Shire far away, nor of the dark shadows and perils that encompassed them, but of the fair things they had seen in the world together, of the elves, of the stars, of trees, and the gentle fall of the bright year in the woods. Whew. At last there came a knock on the door. "Begging your pardon," said Sam, putting in his head, "but I was just wondering if you would be wanting anything." "And begging yours, Sam Gamgee," replied Bilbo. "I guess you mean that it is time your master went to bed." "Well, sir, there is a council early tomorrow, I hear, and he only got up today for the first time." "Quite right, Sam," laughed Bilbo. "You can trot off and tell Gandalf that he's gone to bed. Good night, Frodo. Bless me, but it has been good to see you again. There are no folk like hobbits, after all, for real good talk. I'm getting very old, and I begin to wonder if I should ever live to see your chapters of our story. Good night. I'll take a walk, I think, and look at the stars of Elbereth in the garden." Sleep well. Oh, and that is it. That is the last. As we've come to the end of our reading tonight. Yay! That was honestly a really fun couple of chapters. I was pretty surprised that the action was pretty active. Yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I make a big pain about reading the silly songs because I don't know, I don't really know how to read them. And I mean that as straight up, I kind of struggle a bit with just poetry in general because I tend to get lost in it. I don't know. It's something about the choppiness or the word. I know it's not choppy, but it comes across as choppy to me. My comprehension for poetry is not real high. It's actually pretty bad. So I get nervous and struggle with how am I supposed to read? Where do I pause? How do I make it so y'all can understand anything that this dude wrote? I don't know. It's rough. I probably don't know what was going on in the song that Bilbo wrote. I would have to look back up again, but I'm pretty sure the story is stored somewhere in my memory banks somewhere. But just kind of the format of it. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's fun that it's in there. I complain, but it's mostly just due to anxiety. I kind of think it's fun that it's in there. I would probably never do that myself, because of the aforementioned poetry disability. Not because I don't think it's an interesting idea. I know we all kind of laugh at, like, inserting songs into prose in, like, the context of fan fiction or, like, YA fantasy. But honestly, it's fun. It's fun and it's cute. Pain in the butt to read, though. Oh yeah, so we're gonna pick up next time with the Council of Elrond. It's gonna be chapter 2 of book 1 again, and I will figure out how to annotate that to try and keep my dang playlist straight. Goodness gracious, the Council of Elrond is a long chapter. It's from 315 to 356. That's pretty long. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. At some point, I also will maybe have to figure out about how much I need to read. I'm surprised this. Oh, the one after that's not too bad. Oh man, I was sitting going like, how are we halfway through? There's like, oh, we're over halfway through. Goodness gracious, we started halfway. Wow, but yeah, there's like, I mean, we still have a lot of their journey left to go before we get to the second book. But I'm pretty pleased at how much pace we're making. I kind of have myself a little psyched out because it feels like it's a lot, and it is. But how I will often read something is I will blast through the first half. And then, like, every, like, measurable chunk, it takes me the same amount of time, if not longer. Because by the end, I start to, I guess, maybe in a way not want to finish it. So, we're actually moving along at a pretty good clip. Glad I got to reading tonight. Yeah, anyway, I'm going to put that down, because I will keep rambling if I don't. Have a lovely night. Yep, hope you all can find a little bit of your own Rivendell for a bit, because, yep. Shit's going on. But we all deserve a little bit of feasting and silly elvish songs from time to time, so have a good night. See you next time.